Welcome, history enthusiast. Imagine waking up in a small, humble home as the first light of dawn begins to creep through the cracks of wooden shutters. The air is cool and crisp, tinged with the scent of earth and dew. Outside, the world is still quiet. The only sounds are the soft lowing of cows in the distance, the rustling of leaves in the morning breeze, and the faint crowing of a rooster marking the beginning of a new day. For the Amish in the 17th century, this moment was sacred, a pause between the night and the labor that lay ahead. The day did not start with alarm clocks or hurried routines. It started with awareness, presence, and a deep connection to the natural world. Inside the small home, the family stirs quietly, careful not to disturb the calm of the early hours. The homes were modest, built from local timber and stone, with simple furnishings that spoke of function rather than luxury. Each room had its purpose, each item its place. A wooden table and benches formed the center of the living area where meals would be shared and prayers recited. Beds were simple, often straw-stuffed mattresses covered with hand-sewn quilts, and personal possessions were minimal. Every object had meaning and nothing was wasted. In this simplicity there was an elegance, a sense of order and intentionality that permeated every aspect of life. The morning routine began not with noise or rush, but with prayer. Faith was the cornerstone of Amish life, a guiding principle that informed every thought, decision, and action. Morning prayers were often recited together as a family, voices blending in harmony, offering gratitude for the gift of life, for protection, and for the promise of a new day. These prayers were not rote or perfunctory. They were moments of reflection, moments in which each individual contemplated their place in the world, their responsibilities, and the importance of living according to God's will. In these quiet hours, the Amish were reminded that life was not merely about survival. It was about purpose, connection, and devotion. After prayer, attention turned to the first meal of the day. Breakfast was simple but nourishing, reflecting the values of frugality and practicality. Bread, often freshly baked from grains milled at home, formed the staple of the meal. Cheese made from milk gathered and processed the previous day provided sustenance and protein. Occasionally, preserved fruits or vegetables would be added, a reminder of the family's resourcefulness and the cycles of the seasons. Unlike modern meals, which often prioritize flavor, variety, or indulgence, the Amish breakfast was about sustenance, about preparing the body and mind for the work that lay ahead. Each bite was deliberate, a recognition that nourishment was not merely physical but spiritual as well. Children, too, participated in the morning rituals, learning the rhythms and responsibilities of daily life from an early age. From the moment they could walk and speak, they were included in household chores, observing and assisting their elders. There was no sharp distinction between education and labor. Life itself was the classroom. Watching the sun rise from the fields, helping to milk the cows, or fetching water from a nearby stream, children absorbed lessons about diligence, patience, and the interconnectedness of community. Through these early experiences, they learned not just practical skills but moral and spiritual principles that would guide them throughout their lives. As the day progressed, the family prepared to leave the safety and warmth of the home and step into the fields, gardens, and barns that sustained them. The land was not merely property, it was a living entity, a source of life, labor, and spiritual connection. In the 17th century, the Amish relied almost entirely on their own hands and the natural resources around them. There were no machines to plow the fields or transport crops. Every task required effort, skill, and patience. Men and older boys prepared to tend the fields, carrying tools such as wooden plows, hoes, and sickles. They inspected the soil, checking for signs of moisture or pestilence, understanding that the success of their crops depended on observation, knowledge, and respect for the rhythms of nature. Women and girls, meanwhile, focused on domestic preparation, ensuring that meals could be cooked, garments mended, and the household organized for the day. Cooking was done over open hearths, a skill that required constant attention and dexterity. Firewood had to be chopped, water drawn, and meals planned according to what was available in the pantry in the seasons. Laundry, often an arduous task involving heating water over a fire, scrubbing, rinsing, and hanging clothes to dry, was integrated into the daily routine. The work was relentless but meaningful, and every action was a contribution to the family's survival and well-being. The relationship with animals was also central to daily life. Cows, pigs, chickens, and goats were not mere commodities. They were living partners in the household economy. Milking the cows, collecting eggs, feeding the animals, and cleaning their pens were all essential tasks that required consistency and care. Children learned early that these animals were dependent on human diligence, and in turn they provided sustenance, clothing, and trade goods. There was a mutual respect in this interaction, a recognition that life was sustained through cooperation and stewardship rather than domination. The very structure of Amish daily life in the 17th century reflected a philosophy of rhythm and balance. There were no sudden bursts of activity followed by prolonged leisure. Instead, each day flowed seamlessly from one responsibility to the next. The pace was dictated not by convenience but by necessity, not by desire but by duty. Time was measured by the rising and setting of the sun, by the needs of crops and animals, and by the seasons that governed planting and harvest. This natural cadence fostered a deep awareness of the world, a sensitivity to change, and a capacity for patience that is often absent in modern life. Even the way Amish families moved through the day was deliberate and mindful. They walked from task to task with care, avoiding unnecessary haste. Conversations were quiet and purposeful, reflecting the value placed on thoughtfulness and attentiveness. Silence was not empty, it was a space for reflection, observation, and communion with God. In this environment, every action carried significance, whether it was drawing water from the well, tending to a field, or simply observing the clouds moving across the sky. Each moment was a lesson in presence, a meditation on the simplicity and profundity of daily existence. Meals beyond breakfast were similarly marked by intention and communal engagement. Midday meals, often prepared in advance, were opportunities for rest, reflection, and reinforcement of family bonds. Food was shared, stories were exchanged, and children absorbed the values of their elders through both example and instruction. Unlike modern practices where entertainment often replaces interaction, the Amish relied on conversation, storytelling, and shared labor to cultivate connection. In these moments, the family was not just a social unit. It was an ecosystem of interdependence, resilience, and love. Faith, as always, was central. Beyond morning prayers, the day included reflections and small acts of devotion. Work itself was considered a form of worship, a demonstration of discipline, gratitude, and obedience. Each sowing of seeds, each milking of a cow, each stitch in a quilt was infused with meaning. Labor was not separate from spirituality. It was an extension of it. The Amish understood that sustaining life required both physical effort and moral vigilance, that every day offered an opportunity to align human endeavor with divine will. Community connections extended beyond the family as well. Even in the 17th century, Amish settlements were small but interdependent. Neighbors relied on each other for assistance with heavy tasks, shared resources, and moral support. The morning might begin in solitude, but soon the rhythms of labor, the sounds of animals, and the presence of other families would weave a larger tapestry of shared life. Trust, cooperation, and mutual respect were essential to survival, and these values were nurtured from the earliest hours of the day. Children's education, although informal, began in these morning routines. They watched, learned, and participated, understanding not just the mechanics of daily tasks, but also the ethics of diligence, honesty, and compassion. Through repetition and observation, they internalized lessons that textbooks alone could never convey. The wisdom passed down from generation to generation was practical, spiritual, and cultural, ensuring the continuity of both life and faith. Even the clothing worn in the morning reflected values and beliefs. Fabrics were hand-woven, garments sewn by family members, and styles simple yet functional. Clothing was durable, designed to withstand the rigors of labor and the elements. It was a statement of humility and practicality, a reflection of the broader ethos that defined every aspect of life. Adornment, excess, or ostentation were rejected in favor of modesty, craftsmanship, and utility. By the time the first rays of sun fully illuminated the landscape, the family was already engaged in their daily tasks, moving with purpose and focus. The day had begun not with chaos, but with ritual, intention, and harmony. There was a rhythm to every action, a spiritual undertone to even the most mundane chores. Life was demanding, yes, but it was also meaningful, rich in connection, and deeply fulfilling. The morning hours set the tone for everything that followed, establishing a framework of discipline, devotion, and awareness that guided every interaction and decision. In this way, the Amish in the 17th century began each day as a seamless blend of faith, labor, education, and reflection. They woke to the world not as passive observers but as active participants, engaging with the land, their families, and their God. The first hours of daylight were a microcosm of the life they led, simple in material terms, but profound in purpose. The morning was more than a routine. It was an expression of values, a practice of presence, and a preparation for the demands and joys of a day in harmony with nature, community, and spirit. After breakfast, the day's work began in earnest. The Amish of the 17th century lived lives that were inseparable from the land. Unlike our modern world, where labor can be compartmentalized or delegated to machines, their work demanded constant attention, skill, and dedication. Each task, whether it was tending crops, caring for animals, or mending tools, was both a necessity and a form of devotion. The day unfolded according to the rhythm of nature, each moment dictated by the rising and setting of the sun, the weather, and the needs of the household and community. Men, women, and children all had roles, each contributing to the survival and stability of the family unit. From the early morning hours, men prepared to work in the fields. Plowing, planting, weeding, and harvesting required strength, endurance, and knowledge passed down through generations. Wooden plows, often drawn by oxen or horses, were carefully guided across the soil. The Amish understood the land intimately. They observed its contours, soil quality, moisture levels, and the presence of weeds or pests. Farming was not a blind labor, it was an intricate dance with nature, where observation, patience, and timing were essential. Planting season was perhaps the most critical time of the year. Crops such as corn, wheat, and vegetables had to be sown with precision and care. Seeds were selected for quality, often preserved from the previous harvest. Fields were prepared with careful attention, tilled to a depth that would allow roots to take hold and flourish. Men and older boys labored side by side, their hands in the soil, guiding the plow, planting seeds, and covering them with earth. There was an understanding that each seed represented not only sustenance for the family, but also the continuation of life, culture, and faith. Weeding and tending the crops required relentless diligence. Summer brought long hours under the sun with little relief. The Amish were intimately aware of the consequences of neglect. A single day of inattention could lead to weeds overtaking crops or pests, damaging food supplies. Every task was approached with patience and care. Labor was not rushed, it was measured, mindful, and deliberate. In this way, the act of farming became a meditation, a lesson in perseverance, and a reflection of the values instilled from childhood. Women and girls were equally engaged in the rhythm of labor. While men focused on the fields, women prepared meals, tended kitchen gardens, cared for children, and maintained the household. Cooking was done over open hearths, requiring constant attention to fire, water, and ingredients. Bread was baked daily, often in wood-fired ovens, and meals were planned according to the available resources and seasonal produce. Preserving food was an essential skill. Fruits and vegetables were pickled, dried, or stored to ensure survival during the long winters. Domestic chores were labor-intensive. Washing clothes required heating water, scrubbing garments on washboards, rinsing carefully and hanging them to dry. Quilting, sewing, and mending were ongoing tasks, as clothing needed to endure daily toil. Every piece of fabric, every stitch, represented both practical necessity and cultural identity. The Amish valued craftsmanship and durability over ornamentation. In these tasks, women taught children patience, skill, and an appreciation for labor that was both useful and beautiful. Animal husbandry was another cornerstone of daily life. Cows, pigs, goats, and chickens were integral to the survival of the household. Milking cows at dawn and dusk, feeding animals, cleaning stalls, and caring for the sick or injured required knowledge, diligence, and empathy. Children learned these tasks early, understanding that the health and productivity of the animals directly affected the family's sustenance and livelihood. There was a mutual dependence. Humans cared for animals, and animals provided milk, eggs, meat, and materials for clothing. These interactions fostered responsibility, compassion, and an awareness of the interconnectedness of life. The Amish also relied heavily on seasonal knowledge. Spring was a time of planting, summer of tending and cultivating, autumn of harvest, and winter of preparation and repair. Each season brought its own tasks and challenges. During harvest, fields were alive with activity. Men and older boys cut wheat and corn, gathered the sheaves, and prepared them for storage. Women processed the harvest, grinding grains into flour, preserving fruits, and ensuring that the household would have enough to endure the cold months. Children assisted wherever possible, carrying small bundles, gathering firewood, or helping in the kitchen. All labor was communal, even within a single household. Tasks were divided according to skill, strength, and necessity, but the overall goal was always shared: survival, sustenance, and spiritual alignment. There was little room for idleness, yet the work was never mindless. Each chore was an opportunity to practice patience, attentiveness, and gratitude. In this way, labor became both a spiritual and practical exercise, a way to honor God, support the family, and maintain harmony with the natural world. The Amish also cultivated a strong sense of observation and problem-solving. Farming was never entirely predictable. Weather patterns could shift suddenly, pests could attack crops, and livestock could fall ill. Success required careful planning, adaptability, and resilience. Men studied the land and sky, learning to anticipate rainfall, frost, and storms. Women monitored food stores, ensuring that preservation methods were effective and that supplies would last. The household operated as a finely tuned system, each member contributing to the delicate balance between human effort and nature's unpredictability. Even mundane tasks held profound meaning. Carrying water from the well, chopping wood for the fire, repairing fences, or preparing tools was never trivial. Each act was part of a larger rhythm of life, a meditation in motion. The Amish believed that living in harmony with God required care and attention to detail. Neglecting these tasks could disrupt the balance of the household, the health of the family, or the yield of the land. In this sense, work was inseparable from faith, a continuous practice of mindfulness, devotion, and responsibility. Children's labor was both practical and educational. From the youngest age, they participated in chores appropriate to their size and strength. They learned to milk cows, gather eggs, tend gardens, assist in cooking, and help in the fields. Through repetition and guidance, They internalized skills and values, understanding that their contributions were essential to the survival of the family. Education was experiential, rooted in observation and practice rather than theory. Each task was a lesson in patience, diligence, and moral responsibility. Beyond the household, the broader Amish community relied on mutual aid. Neighbors would gather to help with larger tasks, such as building barns, harvesting fields, or tending communal projects. This practice, often referred to as barn raising in later centuries, had its origins in these early times. Collaboration was necessary for survival, especially in a world without modern tools or machinery. Trust and cooperation were essential, and the bonds formed through shared labor were enduring. Assistance was reciprocal. Today's help would be repaid when circumstances required it. Even the approach to time reflected the demands of labor. The day began with the first light of dawn and ended at sunset. There were no artificial constraints such as clocks dictating activity. Instead, nature's rhythms guided every decision. This attunement to the cycles of the earth fostered a profound awareness of change, continuity, and impermanence. Each day was framed by light and darkness, work and rest, effort and reflection. The Amish lived in synchronization with these natural rhythms, creating a sense of order and stability that modern schedules often lack. Work was also a form of socialization and storytelling. While tending fields or repairing tools, men and women would converse, sharing news, advice, and oral history. Children learned the stories of their people, the teachings of the faith, and practical knowledge for survival. Oral tradition reinforced cultural identity, moral values, and communal cohesion. Work was never entirely solitary. It was an opportunity to bond, teach, and transmit knowledge. The spiritual dimension of labor cannot be overstated. The Amish understood that every act, no matter how small, was an opportunity to demonstrate faith, gratitude, and discipline. Preparing soil, planting seeds, feeding animals, or mending clothing was not merely a practical necessity, it was a moral act. Labor was intertwined with humility, service, and devotion. It was a recognition that human effort alone was insufficient. Success depended on God's providence, nature's cooperation, and the diligence of the community. The pace of work was relentless yet deliberate. Each day demanded endurance. And yet there was a rhythm to it that was almost musical in its precision. Tasks were sequenced according to priority and necessity. Men and boys worked in the fields, women and girls in the household, and younger children assisted wherever they could. Each action flowed into the next, creating a continuous cycle of effort, learning, and reflection. There was satisfaction in this rhythm, a sense of purpose that defined daily life. Even during rest or breaks, observation continued. The Amish learned from every interaction with the land, the animals, and each other. A slight change in the color of leaves could indicate soil health or pest presence. The behavior of livestock could signal illness or stress. Conversations with neighbors provided insight into crop management, tools, and seasonal planning. Knowledge was accumulated through attention, reflection, and shared experience. By midday, the family often paused for a meal and brief rest. But even this interlude reinforced lessons of simplicity, gratitude, and purpose. Food was modest but sufficient. Conversation centered on shared concerns, work strategies, and spiritual reflection. Children absorbed these moments, learning the importance of balance, physical nourishment, mental awareness, and spiritual grounding. As the afternoon unfolded, work resumed with renewed focus. Fields required continued tending, livestock needed attention, and household maintenance never ceased. The demands of the day were constant, yet the Amish approached each task with care and deliberation. Work was both a discipline and a joy, a means of survival and an expression of values. Even in moments of fatigue there was mindfulness. Labor was never rushed for convenience. Each action, digging, sowing, chopping, or mending, was done with intention, a reflection of the belief that careful, honest work honors God, family, and community. Efficiency was valued, but not at the expense of care or morality. By late afternoon the day's work began to wind down, yet preparation for the next day had already begun. Tools were cleaned and repaired, fields were inspected, animals fed and settled, meals were planned, and clothing or equipment mended. The cycle of labor was continuous, seamless, and ever-present. Every day built upon the previous, every effort contributing to the family's survival and the stability of the community. Through all of this, children learn the profound connection between work, morality, and spirituality. They understood that life was sustained not by chance but by diligence, attentiveness, and faith. The 17th century Amish did not separate labor from life. Labor was life. Every action carried meaning, every effort was valued, and every day was an opportunity to live in harmony with God, the land, and one another. By sunset, the fields and homes bore the marks of the day's labor. Sweat-streaked faces, dirt-stained hands, and tired bodies were evidence of work completed and life sustained. There was satisfaction in this exertion, a quiet pride in having contributed to the household, the community, and the cycle of life. Evening would bring rest, prayer, and reflection, but the lessons of labor, discipline, patience, skill, and devotion remained imprinted in the hands, hearts, and minds of every family member. In this way, the Amish daily life in the 17th century was defined by work, but it was work imbued with meaning. It was challenging, yes, but it cultivated resilience, morality, and a deep awareness of the world. Labor was more than a necessity. It was a practice of faith, an act of devotion, and a means of sustaining life and community. Each day, from sunrise to sunset, was a testament to the power of diligence, simplicity, and purposeful living, a rhythm that defined the very essence of Amish existence. Education in the 17th century Amish world was not measured by grades, certificates, or public recognition. It was a lived experience, an intimate process that intertwined daily life, labor, and spiritual instruction. For Amish children, learning began from the moment they could walk and speak. The home, the fields, the barns, and the kitchen were their classrooms. The earliest lessons were not delivered in lectures, but through observation, participation, and repetition. Children watched their parents and elders carefully, noting the way hands handled tools, the way milk was collected, the way dough was kneaded. Every gesture, every rhythm of work, was a lesson in skill, patience, and careful attention. The apprenticeship model, though informal, was integral to the transmission of knowledge. Boys would shadow their fathers in the fields, learning to plow, sow seeds, care for livestock, and anticipate the whims of the seasons. Girls would work alongside their mothers, absorbing lessons in cooking, sewing, dairy processing, gardening, and the careful management of household resources. But this education was far from passive. Children were expected to take initiative, to ask questions, and eventually to perform tasks under the watchful eyes of their elders. Mistakes were corrected gently but firmly because each lesson carried consequences. Poorly sown crops could wither, improperly stored food could spoil, and animals could suffer if mishandled. Through these experiences, children learned that knowledge was inseparable from responsibility. Reading and writing were also taught, but always in the context of faith and practicality. Literacy served a clear purpose. It allowed children to read the Bible, understand hymns, and participate in religious life. Schools, when they existed, were modest one-room affairs, often taught by a single instructor or by a more experienced member of the community. Lessons were simple but rigorous, emphasizing comprehension, moral instruction, and clarity of thought. The children read aloud, memorized passages, and copied texts by hand, learning not just words but discipline, attention to detail, and the importance of preserving knowledge. Religious instruction was central to Amish education. From the earliest years, children were taught the stories, parables, and teachings of the Bible. These were not abstract tales, but guiding principles for living a moral and disciplined life. Stories of patience, humility, and devotion were intertwined with practical lessons about work, community, and survival. The narrative of Scripture became a framework for understanding the world, informing ethical decisions, and guiding behavior in both private and communal spheres. Faith was not merely theoretical, it was a lived experience embedded in every activity, from the way a child tended a garden to the way a young apprentice learned to handle a plow. Hands-on learning was valued above rote memorization. A child who could recite passages from memory but could not tie knots, milk a cow, or sew a garment was considered incomplete in their education. Practical knowledge was revered because it was essential for survival. Children learned how to manage household resources, repair tools, construct fences, and anticipate the needs of both crops and livestock. Each skill was taught in a sequence, building from simple to complex tasks, and reinforced through repetition until competence became instinctual. Learning was gradual, deliberate, and deeply contextual, integrated into the flow of daily life. Social lessons were embedded in education as well. Amish children learned from observing interactions among adults, siblings, and neighbors. They learned the importance of cooperation, patience, humility, and respect for authority. They witnessed the ways elders mediated disputes, shared resources, and maintained harmony in the community. These observations were internalized, forming the basis of a moral and social framework that guided behavior throughout life. Conflict was minimized not through punishment alone, but through instruction, example, and communal values. Children absorbed these principles as naturally as they learned to plant seeds or milk cows. Seasonal work also played a role in education. During planting and harvest, older children often took on responsibilities similar to adults, reinforcing lessons in endurance, teamwork, and accountability. The pace of work accelerated with the seasons, and children learned to adjust their efforts accordingly. They learned to anticipate changes in weather, understand the timing of crops, and respond to the unpredictable elements that shaped survival. Through this immersion, children developed a practical wisdom that was deeply connected to the land, to labor, and to communal life. Observation and imitation were core techniques of learning. A child might watch the subtle movements of a parent as they churn butter, noting the rhythm, pressure, and timing required. Then, the child would attempt the task under supervision, gradually developing skill and confidence. Failure was instructive, and success was celebrated, but always within a context of humility and learning. Mistakes were corrected without shame, emphasizing growth and understanding rather than punishment. This method ensured that knowledge was internalized, embodied, and transferable across generations. Education in the Amish community was not a matter of competition. There were no grades, rankings, or comparisons. Each child was measured against their own development and capacity, encouraged to progress at a pace aligned with their abilities and responsibilities. Collaboration rather than rivalry was the guiding principle. Children learned alongside siblings, cousins, and neighbors, sharing tasks, knowledge, and guidance. This approach fostered solidarity, empathy, and a sense of collective responsibility. Success was shared, and the failures of one were mitigated by the support of many. Moral instruction was interwoven with every lesson. Work and learning were seen as extensions of faith, and ethical principles were reinforced daily. Honesty, diligence, humility, and patience were not abstract virtues, they were practiced through tangible actions. A child who faithfully tended the garden, fed the animals, or assisted in household chores demonstrated integrity. Learning was inseparable from morality because every task carried consequences for the individual, the family, and the broader community. Through this integration, children developed a holistic understanding of life, ethics, and responsibility. Storytelling was a crucial aspect of education as well. Evenings often included tales of ancestors, local events, or moral parables drawn from Scripture. These stories transmitted cultural memory, communal values, and practical lessons. A child might hear of a successful harvest managed through ingenuity and cooperation, or of a community member who endured hardship with patience and faith. These narratives reinforced practical skills, ethical standards, and communal identity. Learning was not confined to instruction, it was embedded in the rhythm of daily life and the stories that framed experience. Apprenticeship extended beyond the family. Older children and teenagers often assisted neighbors, learning additional skills such as carpentry, tool-making, or specialized agricultural techniques. This practice strengthened social bonds, facilitated knowledge exchange, and prepared adolescents for eventual adult responsibilities. Work, learning, and community were inseparable. Education extended beyond the household, weaving children into a network of shared knowledge, labor, and mutual support. Play and leisure also carried educational value. While the Amish emphasized labor and responsibility, children had moments to explore, imagine, and practice creativity. Play often involved skill-building activities such as weaving, crafting, or simple games that required coordination and strategy. Even leisure was purposeful, contributing to physical development, problem-solving, and social skills. There was a subtle pedagogy embedded in every activity, ensuring that children learned continuously, whether at work, school, or play. Religion remained the central axis of all education. Lessons in scripture, hymnody, and prayer were integrated with daily tasks. Memorization was complemented by application. A passage about patience was reflected in the careful sowing of seeds. A story about diligence was mirrored in meticulous barn maintenance. Faith was not an isolated subject, it informed every aspect of life, ensuring that children developed both spiritual and practical wisdom simultaneously. Cultural transmission relied on repetition and consistency. Tasks and lessons were reinforced daily, building competence, confidence, and character. Children learned the importance of routine, the value of persistence, and the necessity of attention to detail. Over time, they internalized the principles of their community, not through coercion but through immersion and example. Learning was a continuous cycle, seamlessly woven into the fabric of life. In addition to skills and faith, children were taught resilience and adaptability. The 17th century Amish faced environmental challenges, unpredictable weather, and occasional conflicts. Children were educated to respond with calm, resourcefulness, and cooperation. Problem-solving was embedded in everyday tasks: how to protect crops from pests, repair tools, or tend to sick animals. These lessons cultivated not only practical competence but also emotional and moral resilience. Language and communication were also critical aspects of education. Children learned to convey ideas clearly, to listen attentively, and to interpret guidance from elders. Observation and verbal instruction worked together to develop cognitive skills, empathy, and social intelligence. These abilities were essential for effective participation in both family and community life. By adolescence, most Amish children were competent in a wide range of practical skills, moral reasoning, and religious understanding. They were capable of managing significant responsibilities, contributing meaningfully to the household, and supporting neighbors. The education they received in the first years of life had prepared them not only to survive, but to thrive in a world that demanded diligence, cooperation, and moral integrity. The cumulative effect of this immersive, holistic education was profound. Amish children grew up deeply connected to their families, their community, and their faith. They developed practical skills, moral wisdom, and spiritual insight simultaneously. They understood the rhythms of the land, the cycles of life, and the importance of harmony between human labor and divine providence. Learning was not a separate activity, but a continuous, integrated process that prepared them for the responsibilities, challenges, and joys of adult life. Education also reinforced identity and continuity. Each child learned the stories, rituals, and techniques that had sustained the Amish for generations. Knowledge was not static, it was living, adaptive, and communal. Children became custodians of culture, ensuring that the values, skills, and faith of the community would endure across generations. The education of a child was, in essence, a pledge to preserve the integrity, cohesion, and spiritual vitality of the Amish way of life. Even small tasks carried lessons in humility and ethics. Sweeping the floor, carrying water, or tending animals was never trivial. Each act was a practice in mindfulness, patience, and moral awareness. Children were taught to approach every duty with care, recognizing the impact of their actions on themselves, their family, and the larger community. Work, learning, and morality were inseparable threads in the fabric of daily life. By the end of the day, the children's learning was evident not only in their competence but in their understanding of interdependence, responsibility, and faith. Education was a living process, manifested in action, reflection, and interaction. It prepared them to contribute meaningfully to their families, maintain the integrity of the community, and navigate the challenges of the world with skill, wisdom, and humility. In this way, the Amish of the 17th century cultivated generations of children who were not merely literate or skilled but fully integrated into the spiritual, moral, and practical life of their community. Education was not a phase of life, it was a continuous journey. Every moment, task, and interaction was an opportunity to learn, reflect, and grow. Knowledge, skill, and faith were inseparable, ensuring that the next generation was equipped to sustain the way of life that had endured for centuries. The lessons of the 17th century Amish world remind us that education is more than information, it is cultivation of the mind, the body, and the spirit. It is learning through doing, observing, reflecting, and participating in the rhythms of life. It is the understanding that survival, morality, and faith are intertwined, and that true education prepares one not merely for work or study, but for life itself. Through the immersive and holistic education of children, the Amish ensured that the values, skills, and faith of their community were preserved, nurtured, and transmitted. Each generation was a living testament to a way of life in which knowledge was inseparable from morality, skill inseparable from devotion, and education inseparable from daily existence. It was a system that demanded effort, reflection, and participation, but it was also a system that produced individuals deeply connected to family, community, and God, fully prepared to carry forward the enduring rhythms of Amish life. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, the pace of labor gradually shifted. The fields and homes, once alive with the ceaseless rhythm of work, now moved into a slower cadence, marked by reflection, preparation, and the subtle rituals that shaped Amish evening life. The end of the day was not simply a cessation of activity, it was a time to gather, connect, and reorient one's mind, body, and spirit after hours of exertion. Evening in the 17th century Amish world was a transition from individual and family labor to communal interaction, a period where social bonds, storytelling, and shared practices reinforced the values and cohesion of the community. The household itself became a microcosm of social order. Families gathered in the central room, where the hearth offered warmth and light, and simple furnishings framed intimate spaces for conversation, instruction, and reflection. Chairs, benches, and tables were arranged to facilitate interaction, and every object within the home was purposeful, reflecting a worldview that valued function over display. The home was a stage for both private and collective experience. Children learned, parents guided, and family members shared the outcomes of the day's labor. Every evening the home became a hub of learning, discussion, and communal care. Meals in the evening were a crucial aspect of community life, though they were much more than mere sustenance. After a day of demanding work, families gathered around the table to break bread, share stories, and discuss the practical matters of the household. Bread, vegetables, cheese, and occasionally preserved meats or fruits comprised the meal, each component chosen for its nutritional value and the foresight of prior preparation. Eating together reinforced the interdependence of family members, a reminder that labor, care, and sustenance were shared responsibilities. In these moments, children observed not just table manners but the ethics of sharing, gratitude, and attentiveness. Storytelling was woven seamlessly into the fabric of the evening meal. Fathers and elders recounted tales from Scripture, the lives of ancestors, or events from neighboring communities. These narratives were not idle entertainment. They were vehicles for transmitting knowledge, values, and communal memory. Stories illustrated moral principles, practical lessons, and the consequences of choices, allowing children and young adults to internalize the wisdom of the past. Humor, cautionary tales, and parables intertwined, creating a tapestry of learning that was simultaneously engaging, instructive, and reflective of cultural identity. The Amish placed extraordinary importance on conversation as a tool for learning and community cohesion. Dialogue between adults and children was deliberate, thoughtful, and often reflective. Questions were encouraged and explanations were thorough. A father might describe the subtle changes in soil that indicated the need for irrigation, while a mother might demonstrate the proper technique for churning butter or preserving vegetables. Children absorbed these lessons, not merely through observation but through active engagement and guided practice. Evening conversation reinforced practical knowledge, ethical understanding, and social awareness. Neighbors often joined one another after the day's work, especially during periods of communal necessity, such as barn raising, harvest, or major construction projects. Evenings became occasions for coordination, planning, and shared labor that transcended the individual household. In these gatherings, the boundaries between families blurred, and the community operated as a single interconnected organism. Mutual aid was the norm. One family might provide expertise in carpentry, another in animal husbandry, while others offered food, tools, or labor. Through these interactions, young people learned the value of cooperation, trust, and reciprocity, principles that would guide them throughout life. Faith, as always, was central to evening life. After meals, families gathered for prayers, singing of hymns, or reflection on the events of the day. These moments were infused with gratitude, humility, and moral contemplation. The practice of prayer reinforced the integration of daily labor and spiritual life, reminding every individual that work, care, and community were expressions of devotion. Children participated actively, reciting passages, singing hymns, and observing the rituals of the household. This participation grounded them in the ethical and spiritual dimensions of life, ensuring that faith was not an abstract concept but a lived reality. Evening chores, though less intensive than daytime labor, were critical to the functioning of the household. Animals were fed, stalls cleaned, water drawn for the following day, and tools inspected and maintained. These tasks reinforced discipline, responsibility, and attentiveness to detail. Even seemingly minor acts, such as securing the barn or checking the condition of stored food, carried significance. The Amish understood that preparation was a form of prudence and moral responsibility, ensuring the well-being of both family and community. Children often assisted in these chores, learning that care, foresight, and consistency were as important as physical labor. Music and song played an understated but essential role in evening life. Hymns, often sung without instrumental accompaniment, created a shared rhythm and mood that reinforced community bonds. Singing was both devotional and social, allowing family members to align emotionally and spiritually. Through song, children internalized language, memory, and rhythm, while adults reaffirmed their connection to God and to one another. Music, in this sense, was not merely aesthetic but functional. It cultivated focus, patience, and a shared sense of purpose. Education continued into the evening as well, particularly for children of school age. Lessons might be revisited after work or practical skills reinforced through evening tasks. Reading, writing, and religious instruction often took place alongside domestic chores, illustrating the seamless integration of knowledge and action. Children might read aloud from scripture while assisting in mending garments or preparing food, blending literacy with practical competence. This method ensured that learning was continuous, applied, and meaningful, rather than abstract or compartmentalized. Social norms were reinforced through evening interactions. Elders modeled respectful communication, conflict resolution, and humility. Children observed the dynamics of cooperation, negotiation, and shared decision-making. Through participation, they internalized the behavioral standards of the community. Evening discussions about disagreements, decisions, or moral dilemmas provided opportunities for reflection and learning. The Amish placed great importance on cultivating character as much as skill, and evenings were a fertile environment for these lessons. The physical space of the home reflected the values of evening life. Furniture was arranged to facilitate shared activity. Light was provided by candles or oil lamps, creating an intimate and contemplative atmosphere. Domestic spaces were maintained with care, demonstrating attention to detail, respect for resources, and aesthetic simplicity. Objects such as hand-sewn quilts, crafted tools, and carefully arranged foodstuffs were both functional and symbolic, representing the integration of labor, skill, and culture. Community events, such as visits from neighbors or collective planning sessions, often occurred during evening hours. These gatherings served multiple functions: practical problem-solving, socialization, cultural reinforcement, and mutual support. Young people observed the roles of adults, learned strategies for collaboration, and developed social skills essential for their future responsibilities. The evening was a time when knowledge, labor, and faith intersected, producing a holistic experience of communal life. Even within the household, hierarchical structures were maintained through gentle guidance and instruction. Elders guided younger family members with patience, modeling both moral and practical behavior. Authority was exercised not through coercion, but through example and reasoned instruction. Children were taught to respect wisdom, value experience, and participate actively in household and communal decisions appropriate to their age. This system fostered a sense of belonging, responsibility, and ethical development that permeated every aspect of life. Reflection was a natural component of evening routines. After labor and communal interaction, individuals had the opportunity to contemplate their actions, successes, and areas for improvement. This reflection was deeply spiritual, reinforcing the moral and religious dimensions of daily life. Adults considered the efficiency of their work, the well-being of their family, and the ethical implications of their decisions. Children reflected on lessons learned, the stories shared, and their contributions to household and community tasks. Evening reflection reinforced a continuous cycle of growth, accountability, and moral awareness. The transition from day to night was gradual and intentional. Tasks were concluded with care, preparations made for the following day, and family members gathered for moments of quiet contemplation. Sleep was approached as a restorative practice, essential for the next cycle of work and learning. The rhythm of evening life emphasized balance, effort followed by reflection, labor by rest, solitude by community engagement. This balance was not optional but a fundamental principle of Amish existence, ensuring physical health, mental clarity, and spiritual alignment. Children's roles in evening life were multifaceted. They assisted in chores, participated in religious practices, absorbed lessons through observation, and engaged in storytelling or music. These experiences reinforced practical competence, moral development, and social understanding. By participating fully in the evening routines, children learned that community, labor, and faith were inseparable, and that each day was an opportunity to cultivate skill, virtue, and connection. Trust and mutual responsibility were reinforced during evening interactions. Families relied on one another for advice, assistance, and collaboration. The day's work was not only about individual households, but about sustaining the larger community. Evening gatherings provided opportunities to address collective concerns, distribute resources, and plan for seasonal challenges. This emphasis on interconnectedness ensured that each member understood their role within the wider social fabric and cultivated a sense of duty, empathy, and accountability. Even the pace of evening activity reflected the values of the Amish. Movement was deliberate, speech was measured, and attention to detail was constant. This mindfulness reinforced lessons learned throughout the day: patience, observation, diligence, and reflection. The simplicity of evening life, free from distraction or unnecessary extravagance, allowed family members to focus on what mattered most: sustaining life, nurturing relationships, and aligning with spiritual principles. By the time darkness fully settled over the landscape, households were calm but alive, with the residual energy of reflection, learning, and connection. Candles flickered, casting shadows on walls adorned with practical objects, tools, and handcrafted items. The air was filled with quiet conversation, the soft singing of hymns, and the gentle sounds of domestic life. Children were guided toward rest. Elders contemplated the day, and families concluded their shared routines with gratitude, humility, and anticipation for the dawn. For life in the 17th century Amish world was defined not only by the rhythms of labor, faith, and community, but also by the constant presence of challenges, trials, and hardships that tested the resilience of individuals and families alike. While the idyllic routines of planting, harvesting, and evening reflection created a structure for daily existence, the world beyond the immediate homestead was rarely forgiving. Harsh weather, disease, scarce resources, and social pressures created a reality that demanded endurance, foresight, and adaptability. The Amish had to negotiate a delicate balance between their values and the practical necessities of survival, a balance that shaped every aspect of life, from childhood education to the management of households and fields. The first and most pervasive challenge was the natural environment. Life was inseparable from the land, and yet the land could be unpredictable and unforgiving. Severe winters brought bitter cold, snow that blocked pathways, and frozen water sources that required constant attention to keep animals alive and homes heated. Summer, while offering the opportunity to cultivate crops, could also bring drought, storms, or swarms of insects capable of devastating fields. Floods and soil erosion threatened not only the yield of a single season, but the very stability of homesteads that depended on subsistence farming. Each change in weather demanded observation, judgment, and immediate action. Men and women had to anticipate conditions, make adjustments to planting schedules, repair infrastructure, and sometimes work continuously to mitigate potential damage. Disease posed another constant threat. Livestock were susceptible to illness, and any loss of animals could jeopardize food supplies and income. Children and adults were equally vulnerable to common illnesses that, in the 17th century, could spread rapidly without effective medical treatment. Families relied on herbal remedies, traditional knowledge, and careful observation to prevent and treat illness. Community knowledge was critical. Those with experience in healing plants or in recognizing symptoms often acted as informal physicians. Yet even with such resources, sickness could interrupt labor, delay work in the fields, and strain the household's capacity to sustain itself. Illness reminded every member of the household that life was precarious and that vigilance, care, and cooperation were essential. As the cycle of day-to-day labor, learning, and communal interaction came full circle, the 17th century Amish found meaning in reflection, contemplation, and a legacy of their way of life. Unlike societies dominated by material accumulation, rapid change, or social prestige, The Amish measured existence by continuity, moral integrity, faithfulness, and the cultivation of community. Life was not segmented into work, education, leisure, or worship. Rather, these aspects flowed seamlessly, each reinforcing the others, forming a tapestry of purposeful living. Reflection was thus not a luxury. It was an essential part of sustaining culture, ensuring survival, and transmitting values to the next generation. Evening reflection, often quiet and private, provided an opportunity to internalize the day's experiences. After the tasks of labor and communal engagement were complete, individuals, children, and adults alike contemplated their actions, successes, and errors. Child might think over the lessons learned while helping in the fields, recalling the advice of a parent or elder, while an adult might consider the effectiveness of decisions made in tending crops, livestock, or communal affairs. These moments of reflection were structured yet fluid, guided by both experience and faith. The Amish understood that human life is intertwined with larger forces, that each decision has consequences, and that self-awareness and moral contemplation were as essential as physical labor. Legacy in the Amish worldview extended far beyond the individual. Every action was performed with an awareness of generational continuity. Children were taught that their labor, behavior, and spiritual practice were part of an ongoing narrative, a story that linked past, present, and future. The knowledge of farming techniques, household management, religious practice, and moral guidance was transmitted orally and experientially, ensuring that each generation could sustain itself while remaining faithful to the traditions and values of ancestors. Reflection, therefore, was both introspective and forward-looking. Each individual considered not only the impact of their actions on their immediate family or community, but also how their efforts would shape the environment, culture, and faith for those who would follow. The notion of meaning in daily life was deeply intertwined with work, faith, and community. Unlike societies that separate labor from identity or spiritual purpose, the Amish integrated these dimensions. Plowing a field, milking a cow, baking bread, or repairing tools was never merely a practical act. It was simultaneously a moral, spiritual, and cultural exercise. Each task reinforced discipline, patience, and attention to detail, while also connecting the laborer to a larger network of relationships, family, neighbors, and God. This integration gave life coherence and depth. Even mundane tasks acquired significance, as each action contributed to the preservation of life, culture, and spiritual harmony. Children's reflections were shaped by participation in this seamless integration. From the earliest age, they internalized the connection between effort and consequence, between skill and responsibility, between morality and faith. A child who carefully tended a garden learned that diligence sustains life. One who helped mend clothing understood that careful attention prevents waste and preserves resources. One who assisted in communal projects saw the tangible benefits of collaboration. Through these experiences, children began to recognize that life is composed of interconnected actions, and that meaning emerges not from isolated moments but from sustained engagement in purposeful ethical activity. Community reflection was also central to the Amish way of life. Elders often convened to review collective experiences, assess communal needs, and plan for future challenges. Such discussions were not bureaucratic exercises. They were moments of shared wisdom, where experience was weighed, decisions considered, and strategies for cooperation devised. This practice reinforced the importance of social cohesion, ethical responsibility, and collective foresight. Children and adolescents often observed or participated in these deliberations, learning how leadership, negotiation, and moral judgment functioned within a communal framework. Through these processes, the Amish cultivated a culture in which reflection was both individual and collective, grounded in ethical principles and practical realities. The spiritual dimension of reflection was inseparable from its practical and ethical components. Prayer, meditation, and study of Scripture were continuous companions to work, education, and social engagement. Each act of reflection was informed by the belief that God's guidance permeated daily life, and that human effort was meaningful when aligned with divine will. Individuals reflected not only on what had been done, but also on how their actions could better serve family, community, and God. Children learned early that morality and spirituality were not theoretical constructs but active, lived dimensions of existence, manifest in decision-making, labor, and interpersonal relationships. Memory played a crucial role in shaping reflection and legacy. Oral history, family narratives, and community storytelling preserved knowledge across generations. Stories of ancestors, their labors, moral decisions, challenges, and perseverance served both as guidance and inspiration. Children learned to remember not only facts or procedures, but also the values embedded in the experiences of those who had come before. Reflection was thus intertwined with historical consciousness, fostering a sense of continuity and belonging. Life was viewed not as an isolated journey but as part of an enduring narrative, a chain of experiences that linked the past with the present and future. Ethical reflection was also central to meaning-making. The Amish emphasized integrity, humility, patience, and responsibility, not as abstract ideals but as practices embedded in everyday life. Each day presented opportunities to practice these virtues, caring for animals, tending crops, preparing meals, helping neighbors, or maintaining household and communal infrastructure. Reflection allowed individuals to assess their adherence to these principles, learn from missteps, and refine their understanding of what it meant to live well. Children were socialized to internalize ethical reflection as a natural and continuous process, aligning personal conduct with communal norms and spiritual teachings. Legacy extended into practical skills and cultural practices. Every repaired tool, preserved crop, sewn garment, or constructed building was an enduring testament to knowledge, labor, and foresight. Adults understood that their efforts would outlast their immediate lifetimes, serving both as resources for descendants and as exemplars of diligence, care, and ethical practice. Children observed these tangible legacies, internalizing the principle that meaningful labor creates lasting value. The concept of legacy was therefore not abstract, it was materially, socially, and spiritually embedded in everyday life. The rhythm of the seasons provided another layer to reflection and legacy. Spring planting, summer tending, autumn harvest, and winter preparation were cyclical opportunities to observe the outcomes of past actions, adjust strategies, and transmit lessons to the next generation. Children learned to anticipate patterns, understand cause and effect, and appreciate the long-term consequences of labor and decision-making. The cyclical nature of time encouraged patience and foresight, reinforcing the principle that meaningful effort often requires delayed gratification and sustained commitment. Even in moments of hardship, reflection shaped resilience and hope. Weather, disease, scarcity, and social pressures tested the community continually. Yet each challenge was framed as an opportunity to practice virtue, adapt, and preserve continuity. Reflection provided perspective. Setbacks were not failures but instructive experiences. Children internalized the understanding that perseverance, careful planning, and ethical conduct were essential to navigating adversity. Spiritual reflection reinforced this perspective, teaching that trials were part of life's moral and practical education, and that resilience was a manifestation of faith, skill, and moral awareness. Intergenerational relationships were central to reflection and the cultivation of legacy. Elders provided guidance, modeled virtue, and shared practical and moral wisdom. Parents taught children the skills necessary to sustain life, maintain ethical integrity, and participate meaningfully in the community. Children learn to observe, question, imitate, and gradually assume responsibility. Knowledge, morality, and spiritual practice were thus transmitted not only verbally but experientially, embedded in labor, play, observation, and participation. Legacy was a lived process, enacted daily through teaching, guidance, and example. Reflection also shaped aesthetic and spiritual sensibilities. The simplicity of homes, the careful construction of tools, the harmony of gardens, and the rhythm of communal labor all conveyed aesthetic meaning, reinforcing values of humility, function, and attentiveness. Children learn to recognize beauty in diligence, order, and ethical practice, understanding that aesthetic appreciation was inseparable from moral and spiritual development. Reflection reinforced this understanding, allowing individuals to connect form, function, and virtue in a coherent worldview. Even the smallest daily actions contributed to a sense of meaning and legacy. Preparing meals with care, tending animals attentively, repairing tools meticulously, and engaging with neighbors respectfully were all acts that reflected larger values. Children absorb these lessons through participation and observation, learning that every action has moral, social, and spiritual consequences. Reflection allowed them to internalize these lessons, cultivating a mindset in which purpose, responsibility, and ethical integrity were inseparable from ordinary life. Faith provided the ultimate framework for reflection and meaning. Prayer, scripture, and hymnody were continuous companions to labor and social life. Through these practices, the Amish cultivated an awareness of the divine order, moral accountability, and the interconnection of human action with broader spiritual realities. Children learned that life was not merely about survival or productivity, but about aligning actions with values, sustaining community, and honoring God. Reflection reinforced this integration, ensuring that moral, practical, and spiritual lessons were continuously evaluated and internalized. The integration of reflection, work, and communal life produced a robust understanding of ethical and practical interdependence. Children learned that their decisions affected not only themselves but also their family, neighbors, and the broader community. Reflection enabled them to anticipate consequences, adjust behavior, and cultivate moral awareness. Legacy was thus both material and ethical. The preservation of skills, knowledge, and faith ensured that the community would endure and thrive across generations. Even in moments of solitude, reflection was productive. Individuals contemplated their contributions, assessed their moral conduct, and considered ways to support family and community more effectively. Children were guided to think critically about their actions, to learn from mistakes, and to anticipate the needs of others. Reflection was a continuous process, integrated into labor, play, study, and social interaction, ensuring that personal development, moral education, and practical skill were inseparable. Through reflection, the Amish also cultivated gratitude. Recognizing the efforts of ancestors, the support of neighbors, and the bounty of the land instilled a sense of appreciation and responsibility. Gratitude reinforced ethical conduct, encouraged cooperation, and strengthened communal bonds. Children learned to value both tangible and intangible contributions, understanding that life's meaning emerges from participation, connection, and stewardship. Ultimately, Part 6 is about continuity, the ongoing thread that links generations, labor, faith, and communal life. Reflection allowed the Amish to maintain coherence in a world of uncertainty, to transmit values and skills across time, and to cultivate a deep understanding of purpose. Children grew into adults capable of sustaining households, participating meaningfully in community, and navigating life with skill, morality, and spiritual insight. Legacy, in the Amish sense, was not a distant goal but a daily practice, enacted in labor, education, and reflection. By embracing reflection, cultivating meaning, and preserving legacy, the 17th century Amish ensured the endurance of a culture grounded in faith, morality, skill, and communal cohesion. Every action, from the smallest chore to the most demanding labor, carried significance. Every day offered opportunities for learning, moral development, and spiritual alignment. Children absorbed these lessons through experience, observation, and guided practice, preparing them to contribute to the continuity of the community. Reflection transformed daily life into a coherent, purposeful journey, linking past, present, and future in a tapestry of resilience, virtue, and faith. The legacy of this reflective, integrated way of life extended beyond mere survival. It created individuals capable of sustaining households, communities, and spiritual traditions, equipped with the moral, practical, and emotional tools necessary to navigate a challenging world. It fostered a sense of purpose that transcended individual ambition, emphasizing interdependence, service, and stewardship. In this way, the Amish of the 17th century exemplified a life in which reflection, meaning, and legacy were inseparable from labor, learning, and communal engagement. Through this lens, one begins to understand the enduring power of Amish culture. Life was not measured by wealth, prestige, or technological advancement, but by the coherence of action, the integration of faith and labor, and the transmission of values across generations. Reflection ensured that each individual understood their role, internalized ethical principles, and participated meaningfully in sustaining both family and community. Meaning emerged from the alignment of effort, morality, and spiritual awareness, while legacy was enacted daily through labor, instruction, and ethical living. In conclusion, Part 6 illuminates the culmination of 17th century Amish life as a deeply reflective, morally grounded, and purpose-driven existence. Through reflection, children and adults alike understood the significance of labor, the importance of moral integrity, and the value of communal support. Legacy was not a distant abstraction, but a lived practice embedded in every action, conversation, and ritual. Faith, skill, and community were intertwined, creating a coherent worldview that guided behavior, nurtured resilience, and ensured continuity across generations. By reflecting on the day, contemplating lessons learned, and preparing for the future, the Amish cultivated a life of meaning, dignity, and enduring cultural significance.